My name is Jonathon Meades. This series of films is called Abroad in Britain, and it's devoted to the proposition that the exotic begins at home. This is a tree. Here is a cow. And look, a rock. You can tell the tree is a tree because of its bark, branches, boughs, etc. But more than that, because of its essential treeness. Ditto our friend the cow. She is identifiable as a cow by her hooves, her horns, her teats, by the flies round her eyes, and by her imbecilic stare like minor royalty. But more than that, she is identifiable as a cow because of her basic cowness. Likewise, the rock. Sometimes a rock, a particular rock, can look like a slumped cow, but mostly rocks look like rocks. Now we're going to see some transformed tree, some worked over cow, and some altered rock. We sit on transformed tree. We sit at it. We read it. We carry things in cow skin. We personally organize in it. We drink a cow's milk and we eat its flesh. Walls and roofs were once lumps of mineral. So, what do these objects have in common? The right angle. Not the wrong angle, not the left or sinister angle, but the right angle. The root of right, meaning straight, is precisely the same as that of right, meaning straight in, well, a different sort of straight. Morally just, righteous, upright. So the right angle and the straight lines that compose it is embedded in us, whether we know it or not, as the physical embodiment of correctitude. Buildings are domed and spired. They're sprayed with baize. They're tarted up with this frill and that. But nevertheless, most of them submit to the same tyranny of 90-degree geometry. They are the biggest objects that humankind plants on this planet, this decidedly non-orthogonal, non-rectilinear planet. And buildings are characteristically at odds with the Earth. Because the rectilinear is the accepted norm of our built surrounds, deviations from it acquire a considerable significance. A deviation from the rectilinear signals a deviation from social and cultural orthodoxies. This is the London School of Eurythmy, and it's a deviant. It's wearing the uniform of dissent. It's more than wearing a uniform. The entire structure of the place, which is not in London but in Sussex, screams nonconformity. This is Eurythmy. It was one of the countless creations of Rudolf Steiner. Steiner, 1861 to 1925, was a great philosopher, an inspirational teacher, a revolutionary agriculturalist, a poetic architect, a spiritual inquirer, a visionary. Or he was a world-class charlatan. But there are certain things about him which are indisputable, which are agreed on by both his devotees and his detractors, and he had some big-time detractors. His works, like those of most spiritualists, are proscribed by the Roman Catholic Church, and his first major building was the object of an arson attack. That's having big-time detractors. Both the fans and the foes agree that Steiner-esque architecture is avowedly deterministic. Its proposition is that nurture can overcome nature, that shape and colour can improve people's lives, especially children's lives.
If a child is in a space where they feel secure, and there's warmth, and there's affection, it gives them greater scope to develop their imagination in play, because the surrounding security gives them a form that most little children need. So to soften the forms at the entrance and make it very clear, this is the way in. The shape of the door says, this is the way in. An oblong door doesn't do that. If one looks back to one's own schooling, one probably will remember the classrooms, the space in which one was taught, perhaps even stronger than what one was taught there. So the environment of the education actually works subconsciously in us. Now, of course, one can't measure that. We can't prove by any statistic exactly what effect the architecture or the colours have had. What we can say is our pupils tend to leave school being confident and active and wanting to do something with their lives. And there, again, the architecture, we feel, has underlain it a little bit, has gone some way to helping the whole experience of being within such a school.
There is an absurd reduction of all this. Here is a cupboard designed in the 1930s by the Steiner-inspired Petula Company. It's surely touchingly preposterous to believe that the form of something like a cupboard can amend human behavior. Even a nice cupboard can't make that much difference, no matter what the designer believes. Steiner's architecture, and that of his disciples, belongs to the idiom called expressionistic. But like all architecture, it expresses very little. Architecture is not about anything, it simply is. The most it can do is to make an imprecise, though comprehensible, gesture. Elsewhere, this gesture might consist, say, of a rudimentary cross erected in a tin hut in order to transform that tin hut into a place of Christian worship. Here, it consists of the application of vaguely expressionistic hoods to the predominantly right-angled windows of an otherwise orthodox school building. It will consist of a wobbly roof line or some Steiner-esque typography, or two 45-degree angles rather than one 90-degree angle. These gestures are badges, signs of belonging realized in architectural form. The avoidance of the rectilinear becomes an end in itself, a fetish. The very act of incorporating in a building a chunk of unmistakable Steinerism is enough. Ultimately, it does come down to looks. The intellectual, verbally expressed programs that underpin this or that form of architecture are of little moment beside the constructions themselves. These houses just down the road look the way that they do, exhibit expressionistic sympathies, for visual, i.e. for aesthetic reasons. They are not part of an official Steiner program. Their architect has merely enjoyed and taken on board certain of the devices associated with such programs. In this little pocket of Sussex, Steiner's expressionism has become part of the vernacular, part of the visual tradition, one of the sources that will be forever referred to.
I guess, rather lamely, that one day one may be able to judge the consequences of having lived in a building such as this, to weigh the architecture uncontaminated by the teaching.
We came from a typical box-type house. And the new spaces, the new configuration of rooms were very exciting. And after 14 years now, we are still excited by that. And I think that means quite a lot. When you enter your house, almost every time you experience something quite special. The form of the cube is a very primitive form and very lifeless. The more organic approach frees up the spaces and makes moving round in these spaces a much more invigorating experience. So it's not a dead space, it's a life space. I think this type of house could and should improve people who live in them. It's more conducive to inviting harmony for people.
Ramsay MacDonald, the first Labour Prime Minister, had, before he embarked on his political career, been secretary of the utopian movement called the Fellowship of the New Life. He asserted that the Labour Party had its roots in what he called man's utopia building, aspiring faculty. These are built utopias. Perhaps surprisingly, they offer no relief from the right angle. They suggest that utopia is in the eye of the utopian. The buildings of the Tolstoyan community of Whiteway in Gloucestershire are simply shacks. Letchworth, the first garden city, which G.B. Shaw, not quite in earnest, called the heaven near Hitchin, looks like the countless suburbs that aped it. It is difficult to imagine now that it was once a magnet for nude dew-bathers and togaed theosophists. In the British tradition of heaven on earth, heaven looks like earth. Surely Scotland, with its lens-friendly loveliness, might inspire a less earthbound heaven. It might, but it hasn't. Utopia in Scotland is not here. It's here. The Findhorn Foundation is an experimental, interdenominational, predominantly pantheistic community that was founded by a former squadron leader in the RAF Catering Corps.
It wasn't, incidentally, nostalgia for mess life or for Nissen huts that brought him and his family to this less than paradisal site beside an airbase in northeast Scotland. It was necessity. When he was dismissed from his job as a hotel manager, this was the only place he had to go.
That was 28 years ago.
Okay, so you get a blessing to meditate on.
Enlightenment.
One. Well done. And you also get a sanctuary blessing, so you'll just continue to stay up there in an unborn state and attuned to this blessing of
Miracles.
Okay, everybody gets to move 16 spaces now.
Since then, Findhorn has become world famous. At least, world famous wherever people gather to scream primally or to compare transcendental experiences.
3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, but just tell us your purpose again.
To release any blocks that prevent me from being healthy, vibrant, and whole.
The earliest actual buildings to be erected here were wooden prefabs. No blitzed victim of our rectilinear culture arriving here in the 60s would have taken much succor from these utilitarian buildings.
The shift at Findhorn, which makes it architecturally as well as socially and subculturally fascinating, seems to have coincided with, may even have been occasioned by, the influx in the early 70s of a cosmopolitan bunch of communards. Hippies doesn't get them quite right, but they certainly did possess a different set of values and a different body of knowledge to that which had prevailed thitherto. The essentially provincial Britishness thus had grafted onto it a new and eclectic and ambitious bunch of isms and disciplines. A sort of West Coastness took root. Findhorn gradually became an outpost of California, an unofficial colony of that certifiable state. New depths of heightened awareness were plumbed.
Leave me here, I want to stay forever. Leave me here, I want to stay forever.
But at the same time, new buildings which went far beyond the utilitarian were being created. The first of them was this, the Universal Hall. It's a building which may owe something to Steiner and more to Frank Lloyd Wright, but it owes most to the almost obsessionally perfect craftsmanship of those who worked on it. It's a sort of permanent exhibition of high manual skills. One wonders, are British utopias capable of escaping the tyranny of the right angle without foreign aid?
We started to build this without any firm, clear plans and directions. This hall just grew and grew and grew, sort of very organically. And we were designing it as we went along. But I feel that the people who are actually working on the building had this different way of looking at something. We weren't here to try and get the job done as quick as possible. The idea was to actually do the job as best we possibly could at the time. So we spent an incredibly amount of time just doing it, but as I say, it took 12 years to finish it. Well, one of the things I've noticed with all of our buildings is that they usually take some form of circular pattern or spiral type of shape. You'll see that in them. And my personal feeling of that is that it reflects a lot of the community lifestyle. The foundation is actually much more circular than it is linear. And it's also much more feminine. It's much more receptive. So all the shapes that we seem to come up with ourselves seem to have this form to them.
I guess the principal feature that we're trying to incorporate in architecture that we're doing in the community is a sense of this connection and cooperation with nature, and that means really bringing nature into the interior space as well as around the exterior, so that people actually have an experience of nature inside as well as outside.
I was curious about how a round building would feel like and what kind of experience it would create for a group of people coming together inside it. So with that so simple premise, I began building this little room, this little chamber, really. Well, if you look at the skylight, you can see it's got a very strong sun, sort of solar image to it. But then having put that up there, the time came when I looked at the floor, you know, what to do with the floor. Now, my own feeling is that the moon gives us all the qualities, you know, that complements the sun. And what I've put down here is a kind of map of our experience of the moon's work. Suddenly the moon appears, comes closer and closer, circles around the Earth, and then vanishes off again into the sort of periphery of our perceptions. And it does that every month. So through the year, you've got 12 of these petals, all drawing in the moon, showing how it loves to kind of circle around the Earth and then withdraw again. So I don't know if that adds to the mood of the place, but I've tried to have these two sort of cosmic forces, sun coming down on us, moon underpinning our existence, and showing how it embraces us and comes together at one place.
Of course, one does not need to know all that in order to appreciate the fineness of the building, any more than one needs subscribe to Christian dogma in order to appreciate the fineness, say, of Salisbury Cathedral.
Support that. Yeah. I see the problem we've got to find out where.
The art and the skill of buildings are independent of whatever it was that provoked them. Cathedrals become tourist attractions for the godless. Whiskey barrels are reconstructed as houses. As luck would have it, Findhorn is close to the distillery towns of Speyside, and as luck would further have it, the form of whiskey vats is congruent with the Findhornian style. Maybe, of course, it's more than luck, but that's one that I'm not qualified to answer.
Okay, well, the mini tour begins here in the bathroom, which, as you can see, is a kind of rather richly colored and textured place, and which I'm happy to say is also equipped with all the modern conveniences. And here we have the walk-through wardrobe, stroke dressing room, which brings us in turn to the central living space, stroke dining space, stroke workspace. And this is my stairway to heaven, where I replenish myself every night, at least I like to think I do. And then over here we have the kitchen, stroke galley, which, as you can see, is very tightly designed, which is a rather conspicuous feature of the whole building, actually. In some sense, the whole thing is dictated by the shape. But on the other hand, it's also a rather lovely shape to live in. There's no corners, for one thing, and it's also, I think, an expression of a wholeness, if you like, and also, in that respect, very much an expression of the Findhorn ethos. In its former incarnation, this vat was a spirit receiver, a place where they blended the mature whiskeys, a marrying vessel, in fact. And I'd like to think that in some respects, it is also, well, it continues to be a spirit receiver, although perhaps at a slightly higher level of the spiral.
Just about everything about this structure is admirable. It fulfills its function, its utilitarian function. It's apt for its surroundings, it's clever, it's endlessly resourceful, it's low-tech, it's cheap. The fact that it's also symbolically appropriate and that it means something is perhaps of little moment. After all, it meant something when it was a whiskey barrel. It meant something very different. A building's worth, its value, resides in its architectural attributes, not in the qualities that it's invested with, whether these qualities be ideological or spiritual or religious. Now, let's separate these buildings from their begetters. Whoops. Let's separate them too from their photographers. Right. So Findhorn's buildings have broken with the rectilinear tyranny. But can the same thing be achieved without the benefit of a rucksack full of religious convictions?
Look at this.
This space, equally unconventional, was made for purely architectural and structurally experimental reasons. This is Hook Park, a furniture-making school in West Dorset, which was designed by the architects A.B.K. and Fry Otto. We may liken its bent timbers to the rib cage of a forgotten beast. It's like being inside the whale. This is the finest thing that a building can do, to work on our senses, to promote awe and wonder and faith in our own kind.
A sort of silvicultural Darwinism is practiced in commercial woods. Trees which fail to make the grade, which fail to attain sufficient dimensions, get the chop from the great forester. These trees are habitually regarded as good for nothing. They're not even good enough for firewood. They're just left to litter the forest floor.
This place shows what can be done with a cheap and plentiful natural resource: green wood, unseasoned wood, a reject material. This is what happens when the possibilities of materials are grasped by minds that are not in straitjackets. This is a formal bender, which helps us to rethink not merely architectural form, but architectural economics. It cuts out the middleman, the component fabricators, the packagers of bits, the purveyors of right angles, who shape the world because they supply its basic geometry. This is unusual because it bends the rules as well as wood.
With a bit of luck, it'll encourage countless legions of others to bend the rules. And then this building will no longer be unusual. It'll no longer be a one-off. It'll be a precursor of countless other such structures. This is a fine building for a new age, for a new century, a new and less spendthrift century of exhilarating atheism and exhilarating architecture which dignifies man and completely forgets about God, whoever he was.